Theme week continues. Somebody suggested I look at my birth year. And that exposes to all of you just how much of an old fuck I am. Because my birth year is 1984. Not the Orwell novel, the actual year. So, at any rate, let's do that. There were a lot of great albums that came out in heavy metal history in 1984, and we don't want to talk about just the obvious ones. We don't want to talk about the Power Slaves or the Ride the Lightnings of the world from bands such as Iron Maiden or Metallica. Neither do we really want to focus on Van Halen's 1984 or some of the EPs that were released this year, such as one of the first Overkill EPs or Haunting the Chapel by Slayer. And yeah, Fistful of Metal by Anthrax also came out that same year, so there are a lot of great bands that really had history kind of just beginning at this stage of the game. So it was a great time for heavy metal. But here are 10 albums that you may or may not know were from 1984, either that or had some particularly significant historical meaning. Number 10, we have Y&T with In Rock We Trust. This is more of a rock/metal affair. This is definitely one that reminds you a little bit more of where the style of music kind of came from the new wave of British heavy metal style. Something that was actually incorporated into a hard rock sound that definitely feels like it has the 1970s all over it. This is widely considered to be their most successful album. It just is about 50,000 copies away from gold status. Definitely a killer listen. At number 9, we have Ample Destruction by Jag Panzer. Jag Panzer is a band we've talked about before. I've reviewed albums of theirs. I've spoken extensively with one of their guitar players over the course of about 15 years. This is where the legend all began. This is whenever Jag Panzer, which is an American product, really got their wings and really got started. It definitely is, it sounds a little bit more rough. It will not remind you of the same trademark Jag Panzer that you heard during the latter part of the 1990s all the way up until the most recent works. However, Ample Destruction definitely showcases the level of talent that these boys really possessed from the very, very get-go. They could have had a lot more albums that they actually output had they been more popular, and this is still a band that you should actively seek out today. Mark Brody, if you're watching this, fucking love you, dude. Number 8, Metal Church with their self-titled album. Thrash metal was definitely blossoming, and Metal Church was a band that came along that really kind of was part of this wave, however, was not one that kind of got the same level of respect as a lot of the other groups out there. There are plenty that definitely fit into this mold. But Metal Church's debut definitely showcased a great deal of songwriting between Kirk Vanderhoof and David Wayne that really showcased what Metal Church really had to offer. It's a shame that these guys had to undergo the history that they have gone, and it's a shame that they, it really isn't a shame that they're still continuing and soldiering on, but it's a shame that they have lost so much and kind of done their best in order to keep this band alive 30 years later, and we're all very thankful for that. 84 is whenever it all got started. Number 7, Trouble with Psalm number 9. Doom metal was something that was kind of just a pleasant thought. It was something that perhaps described some of the earliest Black Sabbath albums, or it really wasn't something that was incorporated as a whole until much later on, especially in the 1990s, where there was definitely an explosion within the subgenre that kind of happened behind the scenes. Psalm 9, though, from a band called Trouble, definitely feels like a Doom record. It definitely has a lot of Sabbath-laden riffs, and it definitely really maintains that whole principle, that whole atmospheric ideal. It definitely has a darkness to it, even though the band themselves are not really what you would consider to be a very dark band. Trouble also was able to score a couple of other really, really killer albums, one of which that I really enjoy is Manic Frustration and Plastic Green Head, which happened in the 1990s. Not quite the same style as you're going to hear with Psalm number 9, but it came out in 84 and ended up being part of a revolution that would get a lot more respect now if more people knew about it. Number 6, Running Wild, Gates of Purgatory. This album, I was surprised to learn, sold 235,000 copies worldwide. And I'm sure a lot of people don't remember Running Wild. Speed metal. Speed motherfucking metal. This was good stuff. At one point in time, this band kind of had a pirate theme to it, a piracy theme to it. It was really, really weird. But this is one where they decided to dial up the Satan and just go to town. Riffs upon riffs upon riffs upon riffs. God damn, is this album a classic. You gotta check this out if you haven't already. Number 5, Don't Break the Oath by Merciful Fate. This is an album that, for me at least, showcased where King Diamond was going to be going once he went solo. Most of the stuff that many of you were probably exposed to thanks to the Merciful Fate medley by Metallica, well, none of it's on here. but it's still a darn good album. It's one that definitely encourages a little bit more progression, something that is you hear about all the time now, but for that to happen back then was certainly a little bit out of character. So this is an album that showcases Merciful Fate growing as songwriters a little bit, and once again, really taking us on a journey that we would see and hear a lot more whenever we got into King Diamond's solo workings during the latter part of the 1980s and the first part of the 1990s. I'm especially looking at albums such as The Eye, even though it doesn't seem to bear an exact resemblance, which it shouldn't. It's definitely something where you can kind of see where the wheels were starting to turn. Number 4, The Warning by Queensryche. Jeff Tate may be an asshole now, but back then, these guys were fresh. These guys were a brand new band. The Warning being their very first album, coming off of the EP Queen of the Reich, which had occurred prior to that. This is an album that has a weird mix to it. It's one that actually feels a bit damaged, and Jeff has said in many interviews that he's never been satisfied with the mix for this album, and essentially that there was very little to any control that the band had over that. Instead, it still sounds like it has a lot of promise and a lot of potential to it, but it makes you wonder what the band really wanted to do with it. It definitely feels like a little bit was out of control. Maybe for the best, considering what Queensryche really became during the latter part of the 80s, the first part of the 90s, before things all really, admittingly, went to shit. But this is the album that started it all. This is a Queensryche legend. This is one that certainly is worth seeking out. Number 3, we have the self-titled album by Bathory. It's not even 30 minutes in length. It's definitely one of the most underground known albums to the mainstream. However, for those of us who have a little bit more of a taste, those of us who know our history, we know that this is, in fact, pretty legendary. This is an album that doesn't span 30 minutes, but still is able to be maintained and regarded as perhaps one of the very first black metal albums of all time. And that's something that could be kind of co-included with a band that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. Either way, it was extreme metal. It was definitely one that gave birth and gave rise to a lot of what we were going to be seeing within the next decade, and a lot more of what we see even today. So this album is certainly legendary. If you can find this little son of a bitch, goddamn, hold on to it, treasure it. Precious, precious, precious. Number 2, Saxon with Crusader. Saxon is a band that has always, I think, never gotten the respect that they deserved. They've gotten sales, they have respect within their, from their peers. But whenever it comes to fans, I feel that this is a band that is oftentimes left off of lists, and they're a band that could have really had the potential to be just as important as a band like Iron Maiden that they share a home country with. So it's just kind of strange how that kind of works. Crusader is a fantastic album. The title track alone is really worth the price of admission, and the remainder just showcases some fine songwriting. I think the difference between these two bands is the fact that Iron Maiden had the stage show. They were over the top, they were great musicians, they had a great sound. Everything about them really felt unique and very one of a kind for the time. Whereas Saxon felt like they were kind of just second or third banana. But that doesn't mean that this is a band that does not deserve respect. This is certainly an album that deserves respect. It was released in 1984. Find this fucker and love it to death because it's awesome. Number 1 is a tie, mainly because both of these albums incorporate some of the same individuals, and they both came out in 1984. First off, Hellhammers with the Apocalyptic Raids EP, and then Celtic Frost with Morbid Tales. The story behind this is pretty simple. Hellhammer was the original band. 3 months after Apocalyptic Raids came out, the band kind of dissolved and reformatted itself and became Celtic Frost, and later on in the year, released Morbid Tales. These are considered to be two of the most seminal and important releases in extreme metal. These are considered to be hugely influential, not to mention these are songs that have been covered by countless other extreme metal bands within the past, and I'm sure even more will touch them in the future. Songs such as Into the Crypts of Rays, songs that have been covered by bands that we talk about on this channel, such as Opeth. And these two albums are considered to be some of the early groundwork to some of the great bands that we love, enjoy, review, talk about ad nauseum today. If it wasn't for these two, and for Bathory's self-titled release, and a handful of others around this time frame, if it wasn't for a band such as Venom, that also had a release from 1984 with At War with Satan, then where would we be today? It's kind of a weird and fun history lesson or a historical thought, but it's one that I don't want to think about all that much because I kind of like where we're at. So there you go, 10 albums, actually 11, and I mentioned about 5 or 6 others, that were released in 1984, my birth year. And really, that just showcases how much that metal was influencing the future in its earliest days. And I say earliest because the genre at that point had only been about 15 years old. So we have a lot of debts to owe to the past. And I'm not just saying that because I'm an old fart too, but I'm also saying it because you have to respect your past to understand the present and hopefully make a better future. Cover Killer Nation, that's me. Out, that's what I am. Peace.